Welcome everyone back for our last press conference. This one is with Eyal Weizman, who is the founder and director of Forensic Architecture, which of course is another one of our 2024 laureates this year. We're very excited to welcome this really fascinating and pioneering research agency into our rank of laureates. So Eyal, without further ado, I would like to start by asking you, we look at the news, we see all of this violence that is either escalating or just keeps going on for years and years. So how is your work with forensic architecture contributing to ending such violence?
Oh, this is a very big task, and I am not sure that we are on a path to ending a cycle of violence that has been as long as more than 100 years. And I guess that you are talking about Palestine, though that in forensic architecture we work about many other places. I think that for us, architects, designers, human rights defenders, lawyers that compose our group, it is a way of living through the tragedies, the problems of the present, that we are trying to engage in as little as possible in achieving a measure of accountability, of discovering the truth through connections with peoples, with communities on the ground, with our means of seeing the world and seeing its horrors through a kind of the optical device of architecture that we are wearing. And I think hope is something that is broken down to many little fragments of hope, fragments of accountability, fragments of measures of help when you are facing such an onslaught, when we're living through such an absolute tragedy. You need to hold on to something. You need to hold on to each other, and you need to show solidarity. And it is with our means and our ongoing work that this is what we're trying to do, to offer a measure of solidarity to all those communities we're working with. You know that what we do is relatively unique in the landscape of architecture, because architects take the tools and techniques and software that have been developed over the years and design ever and ever more banal spaces. These are the spaces of the everyday that some of us in the global north are fortunate enough to be in. But those very tools and techniques allow you to see also deeper into history and allow you to understand the present in a different way, because so much of what we see today in Beirut, in Gaza, in all those cities that are erupting in a kind of spectacle of violence, are cities undergoing violence. And you know that in today's conflict, most violence happens in cities. It's not a secret that most of humanity now are living in cities, and therefore most of acts of violence are in cities. But the city has also become an instrument of state control and repression. And somehow, when the city is targeted, people are targeted in their homes. The majority of people that are dying today in wars are dying in houses, and so many of them are dying in their own homes. And therefore, an understanding of the relation between architecture Architecture was meant to be a shelter, but becomes a trap, sometimes a death trap. The city and violence is so important. And architecture is a medium, it's a mechanism that kind of is supposed to bring people together. And for us, where it fails to do so, where architecture fail in its task, we use the techniques of an architect, the sensibility of the architect. We invert everything that we studied in architectural schools about what architecture is and what you need to do with architectural software and technique. We basically use them in inverse. But what we do is also the truth construction. The construction of truth is not something that is easy, that is just lying there. You need to build it. You need to build it like a building. And like you build a building, it's the people that are involved in that act of construction that are so important. Firstly, the community is at the forefront of conflict, struggling for liberation, for return, for peace and justice, and freedom from persecution. Working together with others of all kinds, people that bring all sort of expertise. And all those bits of evidence that we find, architectural evidence, are built together into a construction that is architecture-like. But I think that this is bringing some measure of hope in this hopelessness.
So why is it important, especially from a survivor's or victim's perspective, to reconstruct or to construct these places and instances of violence and oppression?
I think that state violence, and in the context of Israel-Palestine colonial violence in the occupied Palestinian territories and elsewhere, is always two things. It's also always a violence against people and things, and it's a violence against the truth of what has taken place. Denial is part of the state horror. Denial is part of colonialism. Denial is part of genocide, meaning that what we see today are battles happening on two fronts at the same time, on the field and in the public domain, about the meaning and essence of what has taken place. And it is absolutely important, firstly, as an act of acknowledgement of people's experience, of registering people's experience, of making the truth a kind of collective construction of a multiplicity of experiences and point of view recorded through memory, in writing, in videos. You know, today the videos that we see online are a form of testimony. They are contemporary testimony. They're a testimony for the internet age. And in order to stop violence and in order to bring attention to what is happening, one has to be able to account for what has happened. But what is important is not only that one accounts and tells the truth about the horrors in Gaza, about the Israeli genocidal campaign there, about the onslaught on Beirut at this moment, but the way in which you tell it and the means of telling are absolutely important. You don't need to only to use truth politically, but to build it politically, meaning the truth, to build the truth is a collective process. You need to socialize the acts of truth-telling, and it needs to bring together different perspectives, both professional and experiential, from the ground and from the kind of the multiplicity of media that is surrounding us.
And of course, forensic architecture works globally. So I wonder if you could say a couple of words about how you choose the communities to work with. You always emphasize that it's very much a community-based work. Could you tell us about that? How do you choose where to work?
I think it's more how the communities choose us. And we have decided here in forensic architecture that we are not entering into a site of trauma uninvited. We're not working like human rights organization that have stations everywhere like eyes or radar and kind of survey equally all things. We decided to do human rights differently, and it means first and foremost that we are always part of a struggle for liberation, return, justice. We are always embedded, situated in and working with a community. And we use the techniques that we do for collective work. So effectively, the process begins by a community in Mexico, in Bogota, in Istanbul, in Palestine, approaching us. We have now the profile and the reputation. People know that that this is that perhaps that we could help. In Eastern Turkey, you know, whether it is to do with the Turkish police killing of a human rights lawyer called Tahir Elçi. It is the community, his friends, the Diyarbakir Bar Association that approach us and ask us to work, whether it is the killing by the Israeli army of Shirin Abu Akleh, the very famous Palestinian journalist from Al Jazeera who was murdered by the Israeli army a couple of years ago. It is about her family coming to us and to the human rights organization Al-Haq, which is our partner in Palestine, and asking us to work. In this moment, we would not work for them, but we would work with them. We would devise a system of an investigation as a collective endeavor. Now, people need to a little bit imagine what it is that we do on the kind of, we talk about architecture, etc. When violence takes place in cities, a city is also a media environment. It's a social environment, it's a lived environment, but it's also a media environment. People have a lot of recording devices, they record audio, they record videos, they record photographs. Each one of those bits of evidence is a very partial view onto a complex reality. Let's say, as we investigate now Gaza, you know, in one image we would see a plane in the sky. In the other, you would see a mushroom rising from a mushroom cloud. In the third, we would hear civilians describing their experience or recording what happened to their loved ones or worse. You would see in another video an ambulance coming in, and in another one an Israeli tank charging over. You need to bring all those together. Sometimes we need to bring in a single case hundreds and hundreds of videos. And for that purpose, we build complex 3D models of the environment, and they become like an archive. They become like an archive of testimonies and of videos, and the architectural model becomes a means of narrating what has happened. Another way that we work very often is working very closely with survivors of extreme violence. And survivors of extreme violence have usually difficulty, which is very understandable, in remembering what has happened. And that gap in memory is also keeps their trauma alive. It's almost like a void around which everything else is circulating. And very often, survivors would come to us and ask us to help them recall what has taken place, whether they are survivors of a Syrian torture prison, whether they are descendants of survivors of the genocide of the Nama and Over Herero people in an area today that is today called Namibia, whether it is a survivor, a German survivor of a drone strike in Pakistan, as we've worked with a person like that. Everything before the incident might be clear, everything after, but the heart of violence is an act of erasure. It is an experience so strong that it distorts the space-time coordinates of what has taken place. And sometimes by patiently building architectural models, placing a piece of furniture at a time, like we've done in the Grenfell Tower fire with the survivors of this horrible event that happened just here in London, around the corner, now 5 years ago, where a tower block has gone on fire because corporate and constructors have put flammable material on it. 72 people died in a building. Those that survived can hardly recall that event. And together with them, we built the flats. We built every flat in the computer, object by object, book by book, piece of furniture by piece of furniture. And sometimes the act of placing that object in space is an act of recollection. I remember working with survivors of the Mariupol drama theater at the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. The people of Mariupol, almost an entire city has evacuated into the biggest public building that was available, was a theater building, and constructed something that was a city within a building. That building was everything. It was a parliament. It was an information center. It was a hospital. It was a clinic. It was a school. It was a creche. It was a public kitchen. So all the functions of the city shrunk and found themselves within the building. And then when the city fell, all the videos people have recorded were people erased them because they were worried about Russian soldiers seeing them on checkpoints. And we had to reconstruct that city. And you know that a city could be reconstructed through a multiplicity of perspectives, through the perspective of dozens of people. Each one records a fragment of experience, of resistance and resilience within that building. Together, an act of reconstruction has become a city in itself, because all those survivors have worked in relation to each other to build up that really powerful and heartbreaking moment of resilience and resistance in face of extreme violence.
Thank you, Eyal, for that explanation. I would like to open up the floor now for questions. And as always, please identify yourself and your outlet. You can ask a question through the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand, and I would be happy to unmute you. I think while we're waiting for, there is a question. Keseko, please unmute yourself and you are allowed to talk now.
Yes, I'm not sure if I fully understood your approach. Is it a kind of trauma work you are doing in kind of reconstructing situations which enables the victims of violence to fully recall their experience and go somehow through it? This is the one question which is almost a kind of psychological supporting work. And for me, it's not really clear so far what role does architecture play there, because you're trying to reconstruct sceneries where people experience violence and trauma. So for me, the combination of psychology and architecture is fascinating, but not fully understood.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, for this question. And I can totally see where you come from. I think I need to start a bit slower, and then I will come back and slowly try to clarify it as much as I can, the question that you've raised. So to put it simply, forensic architecture is a multidisciplinary group, but grounded in architecture. So let's say in London, we're about 30, about 20 of us have had architectural education. The others are filmmakers, psychologists, lawyers, and other professions, meaning it's a multidisciplinary team. We have offices in Berlin, opening now in Istanbul, in Bogota, in Mexico, in Ramallah, and in about 12 other places worldwide. What all those offices are doing are working in a way that we call counter-forensics, meaning we are investigating state violence. We investigate the violence of police, of the military, and of sometimes secret services. So we offer communities with a way to investigate the investigators. Okay. The way we do that is being architects. We're using the tools and techniques of our trade in order to model those environments, to put them in 3D space. And in that, let's say, imagine, I don't know, perhaps you're from Germany or from that region. So the work that we've done there had to do also with working with survivors of the 19th of February massacre in Hanau, 19th of February 2020. A right-wing extremist perpetrator enter a bar that is a safe space for migrants. What we do together with them, we take all the CCTV video there, we build a space in 3D, we construct the event, the movement of people within the space, and then we analyze whether the police has effectively, correctly described that event, whether there are any potential questions to do with police conduct. We will not investigate the crime itself, but the police response to that crime. And as we have exposed in the case of Hanau, there were serious inconsistency in the police narrative that, and then when that come with the fact that more than a dozen of those police officers were part of a neo-Nazi chat group, is raising serious questions. So these are questions the civil society poses to the police. Now, about testimony, for us, we often work with videos, as I said, CCTV videos that are recorded by people. Whenever there is an act of violence happening in Chicago, in Hanau, in Kassel, in London, in Ramallah, in Beirut, etc., many phones are lighting up. Everybody is recording something, a very partial perspective, and there is a necessity to bring and resolve all those perspectives together. For us, we consider each video a piece of testimony. So it's not necessarily only a piece of evidence, meaning testimony, meaning it's coming from a particular perspective. Very often people speak when they record and add data to that process. Sometimes we are finding ourselves in situation where there are no videos. In a prison, there are no videos. In Waziristan in 2011, when this drone strike has taken place, there were no photographs or videos of that event. In the Grenfell Tower, as the fire was raging through the interiors, there are very few visual representation of it. The information is in people's memories and minds, and the information is difficult to obtain. We are university-based. We're based at Goldsmiths, University of London, and our partner faculty here is the Faculty of Psychology, and they have a world-leading unit in forensic psychology that is extremely tuned to the problems of trauma and memory. And I think that the contemporary understanding of trauma and of dealing with trauma and dealing with memory has a big role for architecture. Architecture is sometimes a way of recalling, a way of remembering. I mean, think about the old techniques of the memory palace. in which people memorize things by walking through an imaginary or real space in which you put your memories in. There is a direct link between space, event, and architecture. And we have developed together with this forensic psychology unit a means of sitting with survivors in front of computer screens where we build immersive 3D environments. Think of something like a computer game, but it's not a computer game. It's an environment in which you could walk. And as you walk, you can change. You can say, oh, the chair was not here, it was here. And then we'd move the chair. Or they would say, place a window over there, or the tiles were smaller or larger. And memory is attaching itself to the little details, and you never know which is the right detail that by modeling it, the memory is going to recompose itself. When we have when we've done that process with a woman who left Germany for Waziristan in Pakistan next to the Afghanistan border, survived a drone strike, came back to Germany, and it was by modeling a fan and placing it in the right moment where she recalled what has happened because the memory was connected to that fan. So you need to be very sensitive to the minutiae, the minute details of events, and open yourself up to people's experience and offer architecture as a way of traveling, as a journey into reconstructing the past. We can reconstruct the past of, as I said, something that happened in Hanau in a few years ago, or sometimes we reconstruct colonial crimes, such as our work with the Nama and Herero communities who survived, who are descendants of survivors of the German colonial genocide of 1904 to 1908. And together, we find the location of where the concentration camps were and where the villages, and we find old cemeteries by combining oral tradition and memories that are inherited and passed from generation to generation, together with our techniques of looking at the soil, understanding and analyzing old colonial photographs, of our sensitivity to the landscape and to the built environment. I hope this is helpful.
Thank you, Eyal. We have another question from Joshua Castellino. I will allow you to talk so you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Eyal, your work is truly, truly inspiring. I mean, in a sense, the history of the world is a world of injustice and untruths. And your role in truth telling is just incredible, from the colonial crime to much more forensic events that happen. How do you conceptualize, I guess, this vision of truth telling against such a vast backdrop of time and complexity?
That's a wonderful question, because sometimes we work for a year on what the police call a split second. So I'll start with a split second and then I move to the long duration. So very often when we work on police violence cases, the police justifies the killing of innocents by saying it was a split-second decision. In fact, if you hear the term split second, you know somebody's dead. And but this, in a split second, all the bias that is programmed into policing mentality, through generations, if not centuries, of colonialism, of apartheid, of abuse, is erupting in that split second. So you cannot analyze an incident and just keep it in the space-time that the law tells you to circumscribe it in, because you can have a whole trial and we can spend 2 years reconstructing as one split second. But in order to do it intellectually, you need to see the shadow of long historical processes erupting at that moment. And a way to engage with that is almost like to say the incident is like a bundle of threads that you need to unwind. And you need to pull the threads of, let's say, when we look at the police murder of Mark Duggan here, we're pulling the threads all the way to, British and Black resistance to British policing from the colonial time, and the way in which policing was formulated in the Caribbean as part of British colonial capitalism, and the way in which policing was actually formed as a way of controlling the enslaved and slave rebellion, also in the US. The way in which in Israel, Palestine, you have the killing of, by mistake, a split-second mistake of a Palestinian child, is a kind of amplification and condensation of the racism that goes with settler colonial history. So this is, you always need to move across time. Time is a kind of, it's like an accordion. It opens and closes, and you cannot remain within a simple time frame, because the law, the state, would force you to be within, just talk about that time, and you need to refuse that. When we work with on colonial crimes, and the first things that we were doing on that aspect was work that we've done with indigenous Palestinian Bedouin communities in the Nakab, which is the desert in the south of Palestine, who are facing continuous attempts of Israeli removing them from their space. And we have learned that one need to listen and learn in order to interpret traces. The people that are living across generation in those environments know how to interpret the most minutiae of traces. A type of plant that used to grow in a particular place is now no longer growing, or is moving north with the rain, as a sign, a very faint sign of desertification. How is that related to expulsion? And of course, we know that the expulsion of indigenous communities from that area, from parts of Great Namaka and Herero land, as I said, are called Namibia today, are you could see that the colonial processes have led to a long-term violence, slow violence, accretional violence. Violence is sometimes erupting in a kind of, melodramatic way, in an incident, and sometimes it's a step by step, and it is registered on the condition of leaves or roots, or in the particular color of flowers that is changing over time. And you need to learn from indigenous communities about how to notice, how to tune yourself to multiple registrations of testimony, the testimony of people, the inherited testimonies that come through the generation, through the body or the person of that you work with, and also the testimonies of plants, the testimonies of stones, the testimony of water. We have to open a much wider conversation in which testimony is not only human, but is more than human and need to be connected. And for us, that is the great process of learning. We're in a university, we feel we always learn. We feel that in every case and every invitation, it is both a gift of trust to us from the community that asks us to work with. We learn to notice the world around us in a different way.
Thank you, Eyal. Maybe we have time for one question. I don't see any. So with that, I would like to thank you and thank you everyone who attended these press conferences. As mentioned, we are happy to share the recording with you. And it's very exciting to have the 2024 laureates with us now and joining us in the
Thank you so much.
community.
And I just say one last thing, that I'm so delighted on behalf of forensic architecture to have received that. It is so meaningful for us. It is really a gift of trust by you, and it is, you know, we are still here, we are still working, and it's going to give us much more confidence and strength in our work. Thank you so much, especially in these dark times.
Thank you.